Okay, welcome everyone to Senate Education. Today, Tuesday, the date, the 9th, just about 10 minutes past 1. And thanks for joining us, Ms. Carmoli. We are continuing our conversation on literacy. We will then break at 2 for training, anti-sexual harassment training information, and then we'll come back here at 3. We have some testimony on proposers of the Holocaust Education Bill, and you are here to kick us off and talk to us a little bit about the Advisory Council on Literacy's update, what you're seeing since Act 28 was passed, and any information you have.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me here today. Just as an introduction, I'm Gwen Carmoli. I live in South Burlington, serve as curriculum director in Colchester. I'm the chair of the Advisory Council on Literacy, was selected by the council members in that role.
And Senator Gill, are you on the committee?
I was on the committee.
You were on the committee.
When I took this job, I let that go.
Got it, okay. So you have some background.
Yeah.
Yes, it's great that we have a representative who served on the council,
Great.
a senator here. I serve as the president of the Vermont Curriculum Leaders as well, and I'm engaged in literacy initiatives around the state. I grew up in Vermont. I went to the University of Vermont, went to St. Michael's for my master's degree, did a higher ed beyond a post-grad program at Harvard, and was part of the Vermont Leadership Institute, not the School Leadership Institute, but the Vermont Leadership Institute with the Snelling Center for Government. I'm deeply committed to Vermont and increasing literacy for our students in Vermont. I was an elementary teacher, I was an instructional leader, and then have been a curriculum director for about 20 years. So I feel I have a wide variety of experience, and I have connections across the state. So when I'm speaking, I'm representing educators, not only on the council and organizations representing the council, but I work with superintendents, curriculum directors, and teacher leaders from every county around the state. I'm going to start with our sincere gratitude and thanks. Your committee has done a tremendous amount in supporting literacy, both with Act 28 and with proposed bills in literacy, and in supporting the Advisory Council on Literacy. It's been really, really important. And so I put the recommendations right up front this year on what the recommendations are for the General Assembly. Yes. Sorry, I gave you a folder. I gave you 2 different things. I do like to come prepared. I have the testimony for today on the top.
Great, thank you.
I have the report, which is also on the Agency of Education website. I gave some information about NAEP because that question came up on the left-hand side. Vermont results, Mississippi results, the statewide, all of the states and the U.S. Department of Education, and then a sample of a grade 4 task so you could see what is assessed on NAEP.
Or can put a checklist next to it.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
We haven't done that in a while, so that's pretty.
Thank you. The biggest request we would have is to maintain funding for the Agency of Education for the position that was added. I would love to say it's to maintain the Advisory Council, and it is, but really the highest priority request is to maintain the position that was added at the agency. Ms. Lesh, Emily Lesh, is in that position right now. She's a project manager, and she, with the literacy team there, led by Jessica Carolus and Interim Secretary Bushy, have done an amazing job focusing on literacy. And it's been an accelerating effect. And so I think that position is really important. If there were one thing to do, I would say that's the highest priority.
May I just interrupt? Are you looking for it to be full-time in terms, I think she's, correct me if I'm wrong, part-time position, sort of 3/4. I don't know if you want to weigh in on that.
I feel like that's really for the agency to weigh in. I
Fair
think
enough.
Anything we could get is
Fair
important, and
Okay.
maintaining and slightly adding would be terrific.
Thank
But to me, I think they know what their needs are best, and we've not talked a percentage.
Okay, thank you.
But, go,
Well, I'm still a relatively new senator, but I think I am learning that, I think it's helpful to have, a pretty clear directive from experts and whenever possible, and sort of non-nuanced, information and directives, I guess is the word. But I understand, you may not feel comfortable doing that, but I would just I think I would want to just be real clear about, one FTE position in that.
I think a one FTE would be incredibly helpful.
Okay.
You'll notice that on the recommendations, there are more recommendations on the AOE side than there is on the General Assembly side. So in order to make that happen, a full-time position is beneficial. But I've not discussed that with the agency, so they may say 10 or
Right.
I'm not sure.
Right. True. Minimum.
That's right. So I would say a minimum of a 1.0 FTE, and she in particular has done a terrific job. I think that the agency has worked incredibly hard, and I do include some of the pieces that they have, the deliverables that they've done. You'll notice underneath my recommendations, so maintain the Act 28 project management position. Support the development of resources and accountability measures at the agency. That comes out of the Act 28 bill, and we are in the process of many of those pieces, the agency is, but there is more work to be done in those resources, and particularly on the accountability measures. And I think your support, the support of the General Assembly and Senate Education would make a big difference. And then maintaining the Advisory Council on Literacy. Right now, it's set up in Act 28, so it is scheduled to end September 24 when the funds end. We have representation of organizations. There are 16 members. We have the Agency of Education. We have Vermont Principals Association, Superintendents Association, School Board Association, Vermont NEA, the Teachers Association, curriculum directors. We have community literacy experts. We have a student on the council who has who describes himself as having a learning difficulty. We have a wide range of representatives. The Librarian Association, or it's a community member, but it's a person who is connected to the Library Association. We have wide representation, and we have been focusing on K-3 literacy. We know that there is need beyond K-3, so there's more work to be done. And we've been focusing on reading because that's what Act 28 focused on. We have writing to look at as well. So I would recommend maintaining the council, but expanding the areas that it would look at. And personally, I would recommend, I didn't put this in writing, but I could amend it to say so. I'm on a 2-year role. Vermont Curriculum Leaders do not have a permanent role on the advisory council. At the time, we did not have an executive director. We now do. But my term, I'm allowed to renew one time, which I did. I'm going to be finished in about in less than a year. My term will be up. My second term will be up, and so you'll be looking for another chair unless you slightly switch that. I'm committed to this, and I would love to stay on. So
Okay,
I'll leave it at that.
And then if I may ask Ms. Carmoli, when Senator Gulick's bill really gets us thinking more than K-3, I think some of the other work this committee wants to do is more than K-3. Right now, you're saying we're kind of limited in the K-3, or the Literacy Council is limited.
Well,
to
the
K-3.
tasks that were laid out
Right.
by the Literacy Council, particularly by reviewing 2902, that it was about early literacy. So that was where the focus was. So, and I would say from an early prevention,
Yeah, no,
that's
sure. I'm not saying,
critical.
yeah,
for
definitely.
foundational skills and prevention of reading difficulties, it's really important. But a student may have a reading difficulty at any time in their career, and it may not a student career, and it may not just be in reading. It may be in the area of writing, and so we want to be able to take a look at the evidence that we review on the council, and I would say expand the focus.
And just for clarity, please go ahead and say your No, please go ahead.
Expand your focus. Would that be the only piece that you would want to change if we were to continue the advisory council on literacy, or do you think there would be a new mandate or?
I think it would depend on what the focus you decided you recommended. We did not have time to discuss that as a council. I would say the tasks that are outlined are really specific and are almost accomplished. So we would need new tasks. I would say looking at evidence-based best practices for grades 4 through 8 in particular, that adolescent literacy, there's a new set of evidence-based resources that have just come out. I think that would be really important. I would say looking at intensive intervention for students in any grade, and I would say evidence-based practices in writing, if I were going to say specific tasks.
You don't have those.
I do not, I did not, I wasn't sure that I wasn't, but I could do an amended testimony.
That'd be great, yeah,
Sure.
just so we have those. And then under support the development of resources and accountability measures, these were, here are you referencing the training that started in Act 28?
Yes, exactly. And actually it's the bullet points that are outlined below for the Vermont Agency of Education.
Okay.
So it may come in the form of funding or by providing that position, that continuation of position at the agency. But these are the tasks that we are asking the agency to continue. And you'll notice it's a long list.
Mm-hmm.
They're all supported by evidence-based resources. And I spend an enormous amount of time on this, probably driving my family crazy. When I am doing literacy research, I'm following the newest research, and then I'm following specifically evidence-based practices. Those practices that through meta-analyses have come up with the highest efficacy in an area. It really started with a meta-analysis by the National Reading Panel in 2000. And they identified 5 areas that were critically important in early literacy, which we talk about and you have included in your bill S204. And then the Institute for Educational Sciences, part of the WhatWorks Clearinghouse, they are the follow-up meta-analyses. So they go into smaller areas that National Reading Panel looked at. And this is one of the documents we used. This was the response to intervention. So this was for the struggling learners, and it's specific to the primary grades, which is kindergarten through 3rd grade. Foundational skills, which is critically important, which really the National Reading Panel spent a lot of time on, the best practices and the foundational skills, and then the comprehension in the primary grades. And sometimes literacy, sometimes there's advocacy for one side or the other. Evidence shows both are needed in the primary grades. You absolutely have to have foundational skills and you absolutely have to have comprehension. If you don't have one with the other, you are missing important elements, which I'll show you when you get to NAEP. It shows up quite a bit. And then the other one that we spent time with is CIDAR, which is the CIDAR Center, part of the Florida Center for Reading Research. They do a tremendous amount of work with the International Dyslexia Association and struggling readers. And this is part of the U.S. Office of Special Education. And these are the practices for kindergarten through 5th grade, so slightly expanded, but for struggling readers. So we spent a lot of time in these documents. And so as we were developing recommendations of what for the agency to work on, it comes out of these evidence-based resources. There are research that then shows highest level of efficacy for these areas and specific to the primary grades.
Yeah, Senator Bueller, please.
There's a lot of nomenclature around all of this.
Sorry.
No, it's okay, as well as jargon and, the whole kit and caboodle. So I'm wondering could you explain to us, and I could be misinterpreting something here, but is there a difference between evidence-based and science-based reading instruction?
Good question.
In the research community, evidence-based means that there's an international threshold for the design of the study and the controls that match. So it meets an international standard. Science-based usually means that it follows that, but sometimes science-based includes the research that leads up to the evidence. So I would say it's slightly broader, and it includes the precursors to the evidence. And something could be research-based, but it doesn't yet have that efficacy rate, the high efficacy rate, or a comparative control study.
Does that answer your question?
So-
Well, so let me ask it maybe this way. If somebody asks us, how are Vermont students being trained to read and write? What's the answer? Is one of these the answers?
Evidence-based. That's in our federal language and our state language. We are required to use evidence-based instructional strategies. And I know, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you. Yeah.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I have an item I wanted to update the committee on that's unrelated to this current line of questioning, so I'm happy to stand down if you would prefer to keep it.
It's unrelated to literacy.
No, it's related to literacy. For the record, Ted Fisher, Vermont Agency of Education. I'm the agency's Director of Communications and Legislative Affairs. I apologize, I have to go in a minute, so I just wanted to, I got an update. We will follow up if there are additional questions for the agency, but I did just check on the position that Chair Carmoli mentioned. The position is authorized for full time. I can't speak to and don't want to speak to from an HR perspective. If I, for example, I'm happy to tell you and tell the world on record that I'm currently on partial parental leave. So, but the position is authorized for full time. What the position is not is, what the position is a limited service position. And under the personnel policy manual, that when you create a limited service position, it's a position that exists for longer than 1 year, but less than 3. So the ask, I think, as Chair Carmoli is communicating this to, would be to extend that position out or convert it to full time. And so I just wanted to make that clarification. It is authorized. It's not authorized at a certain reduced number of hours. It is authorized as a 1 FTE position, but it is time limited because it's related to the grants that you created under Act 28.
If someone were to ask, and you, who is the state's point person right now on literacy and all of this work, who is it? Is it Ms. Lesh?
That's an interesting question. Ms. Lesh is the project manager for Act 28, so it's probably not accurate to say that she's the full literacy point person for all things. Literacy falls under the Division of Student Pathways that you're well familiar with. Its director, Jessica Carolus. But other activities occur in that division and in the agency.
So Ms. DeCarolis has this in addition to.
Yes, in addition to many of the other sort of like, the division is responsible for many of the things that you're concerned about as we discussed previously, which is that because there's those synergistic ties. So.
Sure, I'm just hoping we can get to the point, and I don't know if other states, but I suspect other states might have this pulled up and have, somebody that's really running the show on literacy. I realize there has to be
a director of literacy in the same way we have a director of, say, special education services. As you, I think as you mentioned, there's not a specific sort of director level or manager level role that's one person.
Okay. Speaking of, who is your director of special ed?
Let me get back to you.
I have a trick question.
Her first name is Heather, and I want to say I'm gonna.
Boucher.
It's not Heather Boucher. We have a new director of special ed. Who I have not met in person yet. I will get you the name.
Thank you.
And can I ask?
Yeah.
Sorry, I know you're leaving, but how long was that position unfilled? Do you know?
I don't know.
Okay.
What I do know is that we went through multiple processes of recruitment. And that will sometimes happen where if we can't attract the right candidate, or if we are going through a process and making an offer, and then that person isn't, will sometimes repost. So without going too deep into the murky waters of human resources and talent acquisition, I know it was vacant for a time, and we're very grateful to have our new special education director.
Thank you.
Sure. So the short answer is evidence-based.
Okay.
Science usually includes the research that leads up to, and in Title I funding and in federal funding on the general education side, the requirement has been evidence-based. On special education, until fairly recently, it has been research-based, and they recently moved to evidence-based. So science is an umbrella term, but it's the research and evidence. So I included for you the tasks that were outlined in Act 28 in the progress, because I was like, I am a pretty organized person and like to know what the objectives are.
I like this.
Okay, thank you. I'm putting a little check next to that, good.
Yeah.
I also put up for you what the assessment results for the Smarter Balanced assessment were and the NAEP assessment. And then I have some additional comments about NAEP and some resources for you. We don't have disaggregated data on the Smarter Balanced assessment results, nor do we have disaggregated data on the most recent Vermont Comprehensive Assessment results. We've been waiting for those, and I think they should be coming soon. At a school system level, I can see my own, but I cannot see across the state yet, so they've not been released. I can say that from my school system, I know how hard we are working on literacy and mathematics, and systems of support, multi-tier systems of support, and our scores went up from Smarter Balanced to Vermont Comprehensive Assessment. And probably the agency who is watching me right now is cringing because they don't like to see comparison, and yet I do use data. I'm looking at it a lot, and I'm heartened to see that efforts that we're doing are showing some growth. So in general, we have lower proficiency than we would hope for on the Smarter Balance and the NAEP results. I would say that in Smarter Balance, we start in grade 3. On NAEP, they assess in grades 4 and in grade 8. The interesting thing in Vermont about the NAEP score is that our 4th grade are lower than our 8th. Well, the scores are exactly the same, but our standing and where they are in the states shifts. So what was it, 34% met or exceeded in grade 4 and 34% at a proficient level. Now, proficient is not able to read. It's able to read, analyze, and interpret, and it includes a written response. So I want you to understand it's more than being able to read. It's being able to read and apply at a deep level. 34% were basic in grade 4 and in grade 8. That's a concerning number. We want those higher. But our grade 8 on NAEP is one of the leading states. And so I included a graph at the end of this and in a separate, you can see where Vermont sits in grade 4 compared to other states and in grade 8. So the other thing to notice is that several of the states, I might need to pull out my glasses, sit at 34%, and then they list them alphabetically. So Vermont, each one of those states that scores at 34 has the same positioning. So they may have differences in disaggregated data. One of the things about our NAEP scores is that we don't have full racial disaggregation data from NAEP because we have very small, it says the language they use is we don't meet the reporting requirements. That means that we are under a certain threshold for reporting.
Ms. Carmelie, would you be able to, we always talk about these scores and these tests, and they're so big. Can you get your hand on some questions for us?
Yes, if you look inside your folder.
Really?
Really? If you look inside your folder, on the left-hand side in the back, and it's in my scribble up at the top, NAEP grade 4 example.
Oh yeah, okay, great.
This is a sample task from the NAEP grade 4, and it's on the NAEP website. You can go onto the website, you can look at a grade 4 task in literacy and in grade 8, and you can look at math sample questions. So students are asked to read a passage.
Okay.
And then they're asked to read a second passage. In this example, they have, it looks like a literary task, and then they have a poem that they read, a second task. Birdfoot's Grandpa is the poem. And then they're asked a series of questions. So I included the questions, and they have to interpret. They have to locate and recall, that's a lower threshold. Interpret, locate, recall, critique, and evaluate. They have to integrate and interpret. And so the depth of knowledge, it starts at recall is what you would call as a basic level, and then it moves up from there. These tasks are challenging and they're very specific. So you have to hang on to two different sets. And sometimes the students are doing this on paper and sometimes they're doing it online. It varies by school system. Not every fourth grader in the state takes it. So in my school system, they
Right.
come, it's a random sample.
It's the random sample.
And so they come, they do 100 students. I have 160 students in that grade, I think about 160. So it's a random sampling of that, and they only take 100 of them. It's a full day of testing. And there is a written response. So if you look on the back page, the last task is called a constructed response. So they have to do something and it's probably comparing the two tasks. That's a hefty task. So when we're talking about proficiency, I just want it to be, it is not the same as being able to read and identify, or even read and understand. It's analyze and interpret on two different types. And sometimes it's literary and sometimes it's informational.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want to reiterate how absolutely appropriate that measure is. It's where we start to learn how to be critical thinkers, which is so key to, living in a democracy.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm a big believer in assessment. I wholeheartedly agree. And I like to understand when I see results, and I don't get school system results for NAEP. I only get the state results. I'm curious about this. What does that mean for my fourth graders? And what does that look like compared to my Smarter Bounce or my Vermont Comprehensive Assessment? And then what does that look like? And we use STAR assessment from kindergarten through grade 10. What does that look like with my STAR reading assessments? So we work, I would say what's really important to know about Vermont is that our state standards already require the 5 areas from the National Reading Plan. We already require foundational skills. We are very fortunate in that way, and we work very hard on that. And it's in our education quality standards. I say this to my teachers, I don't get to say no thank you. I'm not going to teach this. It's in our standards. We have multi-tiered systems of support, which means that when a student it's a system that we starts with a screener that has a follow-up assessment if students are not doing well. It does not have a specific follow-up, but it has a system that we screen students, we have follow-up assessment, we have progress monitoring, we have supports. When that support doesn't work, we add another support in and it gets more intensive. We have that in state statute, and we are implementing that across the state. It's not equal implementation. It's happened at the same time as funding challenges and changes for special education. So I recognize it may not be, my special ed colleagues may be working on other aspects as in addition to multi-tiered systems of support. So we have that in place. And we have evidence-based instructional practices, resources that have been added onto the agency's website that we're providing now free training on the literacy modules. We have a lot in place. At the same time, what's happening is a lot of shift is happening in the classroom. I may not have been as systematic and explicit as I needed to be. I may not have had enough training, or I may have hired new teachers who don't have that, or I may have veteran teachers who need more aspects of that. So there's a lot of work in place. I would say at a minimum, Vermont has a lot there already. We're really fortunate, and we have work to do. Yeah.
Senator Williams keeps looking at me, so I feel like I have to speak up.
Okay.
There is a lot in place, which is amazing. I mean, I was a teacher for many years, and my colleagues are incredible. So I shout out to all of them. And yet, one of the things I like about the bill is that it goes further in defining those supports.
Right.
Right. So instead of using the queuing model, for example, it gets into specific ways that we're going to teach literacy to kids who might have those deficiencies.
Right.
So for me, I like that it's very explicit in that way. And I think that is what will ultimately make the difference.
Yeah, so it's sort of shifting over to there, and I included my comments
Before
in
you
the
shift,
testimony.
Senator Williams.
No, it's just, but if it's in statute, we don't need another bill. That was my point. You don't understand the issue. If it's a policy requirement, then we just make it a policy. We don't need a bill that makes another statute.
Right? But I think what we were just saying is that it's not in statute how you're gonna teach reading, what strategies you're gonna use. You've got the supports, but it's not explicit.
Well, that's where it gets a little bit tricky, and I actually didn't include this in this comment that I'm about to make in my comments. CIDAR, which is the U.S. Office of Special Education, they would say that it's really important that instruction for the struggling learner is differentiated based on the needs. So I think no matter what in the bill, you have to leave some room. We want explicit and systematic, no doubt. Evidence says that's important. But if a student has a difficulty with comprehension, or a student is having a difficulty with visual memory or auditory memory processing, pieces like that, I need to be able to meet that student's needs. So evidence-based would say that it additionally needs to be differentiated based on students' needs. If that could somehow find its way in there and I could add that into the comments, I would be happy to. What I wanted to do was signal support, not tear down anything. I think there are good pieces in there. And I think it is duplicative. I think there are some elements in the bill that are already in our statute. In some different areas. We have multi-tiered systems of support that says universal screening and follow-up assessment. What it doesn't say is which assessments, which approved assessments. So it doesn't get to the specifics. And so I'm not a policymaker, and so I think you would know best how to navigate through that. I wanted to be clear about what is there and I think it could be strengthened. And I think a list of follow-up assessments could be helpful. I think if it's a single assessment, follow-up assessment, that puts us in a challenging spot. It may be an assessment for phonemic awareness, but it may not be assessing comprehension or phonics, and a single, I'm not sure would get us there.
But I don't think that's.
No, it doesn't say
Yeah.
that.
Oh, okay.
I
Well, it might be helpful at some point, if you or a colleague might put it together, is, for me at least, maybe for others, Brian Jr. arrives in pre-K. When is he sort of first tested? He gets tested. These are the results. What happens to Brian based on those results? Then where the NAEP comes in and all these. I think it could just be. It might be helpful.
Yeah. Well,
I'm not asking you to do it. It might be something that be fun for me to do on the week.
Right. So I can describe it for Colchester very well, and I could probably fake it for Burlington or some of the other systems. I know them fairly well, but it is in state statute. It says I have to develop a local literacy assessment or a local assessment plan, local comprehensive assessment plan.
At what grade?
Every grade.
Every grade. So
Every grade.
First grade, kindergarten.
Kindergarten through grade 12. I have to have, as large as my school system is, I have to have a local assessment plan, comprehensive assessment plan. And mine includes a screener from kindergarten on, and we added STAR, Renaissance STAR, early literacy in grades K and 1. And then in grades 1 through 10, STAR reading. It's the same product, but it moves from skill to reading and application, and then STAR math. And then we have a series of follow-up assessments, but we also assess phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, and I do that 3 times a year so that I'm checking in kindergarten and first grade. And then if a student, let's say it was in 4th grade, a student in 4th grade struggled on the STAR reading, I would do follow-up assessment, and I would have some sort of support that we plan. Might be a reading teacher, it might be a Title I reading teacher, it sort of depends on what the funding is, but that's my system. I can't tell you exactly what it looks like for everyone, but I can say that we all have to have a universal screener. Screener doesn't have to be a single test. Sometimes it can be a series of tests. And then our MTSS says that we have follow-up assessment. and we provide supports based on layers of support or tiers based on need. But I think what your bill does is it helps highlight the need for a follow-up screener.
Right.
That that we have when a student is showing need, and this one really speaks to intensive need, that you have a literacy plan that's put in place. A comment I would make, and I included in my testimony, is schools are setting up intervention plans and systems right now, and they may not be called a literacy plan, it might be called an intervention plan. I think it's important that you have room for both, because I don't want school systems are working very hard. Our educators are, they're exhausted right now. And I think adding something in there or bumping something out might hurt it. So could you have both? Could it be a reading plan, which might parenthetically be an intervention plan, like, make it a little broader, but is a comment I would make.
Senator Sheen.
Yeah, I just wanted to, more of a comment to that, and I just kind of wanted to emphasize it because I'm thinking back to something that I think it was Jeff Bannon, I might be mistaken, but I believe he said just about everything that we do does create work for teachers and staff, and I just want to make sure that, if there are intervention groups and then we're adding different groups, that there isn't this sort of, that we're not being redundant or, creating duplicative groups when, the group that might already exist is doing the same task that we're trying to set out in statute. I don't know if that made sense, but I just want to try to be mindful of what we're putting on teachers and staff. But that's not to say I don't support this. I just want to make sure that we're, as we move forward, we also look at the nuances to make sure that we're.
Yeah, right now we're just getting an update from what stuff that you're all doing. Yes.
No, just go along with what you said, is we add another layer of requirements. Not only are we making more work, but we're compounding and complicating the process.
Right. I think, and I cannot speak to the specific plans that special educators, so a student may be on an IEP, may on the screener show a need. We put a literacy plan in place, but that might negate, in some way, bump up against the IEP. So I think working with the special educators to figure out the alignment so that we can meet the spirit of what this bill is doing, but we don't override something or negate something. Special education is federal law, so I that's when I really don't get to say no thank you to, but it's not my area of specialty. So that's an example, but it might be an EST plan they have, it might be a 504 plan, so or maybe what they are calling an intervention plan. So there could be some latitude around that. In the other area, and I know.
Just so you know, we're about 8 minutes.
Okay.
Maybe a little less.
I would say the biggest need we have is to have the Agency of Education create resources, and I think you sparked for me. In what way could we create resource that could create clarity, but not necessarily regulation? And I think we have regulation in place, but there is not clarity and there is not consistency. I think we see that, and I think it's evident in our scores. Something that we did not include in here, but the Vermont curriculum leaders have been talking about, is a very specific instructional guide. What is best practice for early literacy? What is best practice for adolescent literacy? Going back in time, I was a classroom teacher. We took training on Reading First, which was a federal initiative. Here's what instruction in phonics looks like. Here's what instruction in phonemic awareness. I think something very clear could be useful. They've been working on the policy and the planning part. I think they're getting to the instructional part. But if I were going to give them one task that I didn't include on here, I would add that for sure. And I would say that would be very useful. And I can add that in my amendment as well.
That'd be great.
Okay.
I think it would be helpful if you're willing.
Mhm.
even if it's handwritten,
Mhm.
just take us through, not today, but what does it look like when the kindergartner, when you say
Yeah.
it's getting screened in kindergarten, when it's not right, and then where does Senator Gulick's bill connect all of this? That would
Right.
be good.
Right, kindergarten is a,
And I just throw that
right,
out,
yes.
but yeah, that's something, and I think
Well,
that
I-
kind of gets at what Senators Williams and Schumer are also looking at. Do we have any redundancies or anything
Yeah,
that we should just be considering? Because I know Senator Gulick's bill, what's great about it is to me, it's picking up students that are, correct me if I'm wrong, sometimes really going through the cracks that might be, I'm thinking of students that might not be recognizing dyslexia until much later, all that kind of thing. Just be helpful to see
Right.
where all this plugs in.
yeah, I think we're in a transition
Mhm.
in our state from previous identification of special education and
Yeah.
supports to multi-tiered systems of support. Even though we had multi-tiered systems
Right.
of support, it was, Act 173 put a bigger focus on it, and they updated the field guide for the Vermont MTSS field guide, and they shifted the identification model. You no longer have to have a discrepancy in order to be eligible for an individualized education plan. There are two different ways that they could identify students, and I'm not the expert in this, but I can say in general. So they're shifting how, and which is going to shift when. If it's a discrepancy model, which was our previous model, a student might have a reading, might be showing up below grade level, but may not be eligible, may not have enough discrepancy for an IEP until about fourth grade. That's a long time. Now, we probably were providing supports. Title I, we get big federal funding for that, or most systems receive funding for Title I, and we have reading teachers in addition to that. And we have classroom teachers who've been adding intervention time. But we no longer have that weight for that discrepancy. So I think the hope with the Act 173 is that as soon as possible, we can identify an area of difficulty and provide interventions as quickly as possible, and then determine whether the student needs individualized educational programming.
Senator Gulick.
I just wanted to reiterate that, and I said this when I spoke the other day, I also do not want to add burdens to
Yes.
our hardworking teachers
Yes.
and administrators. But to bring it back to why are we even talking about this? We have multi-tiered systems of support, but we're still, not up to proficiency where we need to be. Our numbers are not where they need to be. And that was the genesis of this bill. And the other piece of this bill that's really important is it's trying to call out that this issue of reading has been politicized over time.
Yes.
And it has put people in camps where, you lose the focus, which is to get kids to read. And that's what is trying to be done here. So what can we do? What work can we throw out that isn't working in terms of redundancy and duplicative efforts? Get rid of those and focus on strategies that will work, period. And I don't think any of these strategies that will identify and help kids who are struggling are detrimental to kids who aren't struggling. So it's kind of like it's a win-win. Everyone will learn to read.
Well, I see a lot of positive in this. I would say clarifying that it's about for the struggling reader, that the universal instruction is for all, and the universal screener is for all. And when a student is showing me that we do follow-up assessment and that approved perhaps list of them, and then provide intensive supports, and that there's some room for differentiation based on that student's needs. I can't say what the area of need is because learners have a variety. And I know you have to.
But I mean, differentiation is just a part of the way we educate kids now. I mean, and maybe you think it needs to be more explicit.
Well,
but
I would say, I think you do need to say that explicitly, because some would say, if someone has a reading struggle, this is the only way that you then teach that reading struggle. And that it may be a phonemic approach, it may be a phonetic approach, it may be a comprehension approach, and that may not line up with the need of the learner. So I wholeheartly support the idea of intensive supports and
Yeah.
a follow-up screener and it being evidence-based. Please,
And we're
I
not,
love
yeah,
this.
no, we're not even close to
Yeah.
the markup. I mean,
Okay.
we're just trying to,
Right.
trying to
Big
get
picture.
big picture and
Yeah.
the updates is really helpful.
All right, so I will do,
Thank you
I will
so
do some
much.
follow-up. I will try to get a written visual about MTSS.
That'd be incredible,
Yeah.
yeah.
And please know that I work hard on the yes. I don't sit in a reading camp. I believe so strongly that evidence and good instruction has elements of both, and and the politicization of the topic actually has really damaged some
No question.
so I believe so strongly that there is really good information about instruction that sometimes people get so locked in
That's us.
that they miss it.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you.
very, very much.
Nice to see
Maureen,
you
can you
all.
take this
You
offline?
too.
And